You are listening to The Evolved Masculine. Whether you are wanting more and better sex, more confidence, healthier relationships, or a greater understanding of and deeper connection to your masculinity, this is the podcast for you. I am your host, Destin Garrick. Welcome, everyone. This is Destin Garrick, and this is the Evolved Masculine podcast. My guest today is Cleo Stiller. She is the author of the newly released Modern Manhood. As I was speaking to her about in our pre-interview conversation, I feel a particular connection in that we're writing about a very similar aspect of what's going on in the world, in our culture right now, though through quite different lenses in many ways, and our books have come out so closely together, like 6 weeks apart or something like that. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation, diving in with another professional who has dedicated an extraordinary amount of time and energy into exploring these notions of what does it mean to be a man in the 21st century, and what are the unique sets of challenges that we are facing. She has done so much of her book through the kind of lens of, I don't know, a reporter, if I can name this correctly. So doing a lot of interviews and listening, spending a lot of time listening to men and compiling that and putting it together in a way that's very cohesive and digestible for you to get. So I'm doing a plug for the book even before we get started. So buy the book, check it out. Of course, also buy my own, and most likely just get a deeper sense of if you're a man listening to this, perhaps your own life and challenges reflected back to you through the experiences of other men, and through that, hopefully, new and enlightening ways of understanding your own life experience and journey. And before going further into that, might as well do it with the author herself. Welcome, Cleo Stiller.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, of course. Welcome. Of course, let's just dive into the one question that I hear you dive into with everybody that you speak to, which what drove you really to write this book? And I know that the big question that gets asked quite a bit is, especially as a woman writing this book about men, and I want to hear that, but also beyond, like, why is this important to you?
So I am a journalist and reporter by trade and a television host, and I'm called to this job, not for the pay, but because I really care about telling stories and upholding stories of the personal experience that link us together. I do truly believe that we have more in common than we do in difference. And I like to report stories, tell stories of people's lives that create more connection, for us on this earth. So I do investigative reporting. I never really do takedown pieces. My projects generally yield a more cohesive message. So that's the spiritual, like, why do I do what I do? But why I wrote this book is because so for several years I was working for Univision, and I was hosting a television show called Sex Right Now with Cleo Stiller. And we covered everything from health, technology, reproductive rights, body confidence, gender fluidity. And even though the production team was all self-identified female and femme producers and reporters, our audience was 60% male, which because of Nielsen ratings, of course. And so we were doing human sexuality and the way that technology and shifting cultural attitudes in our country is creating these unprecedented ways in which we're meeting, staying connected, hooking up, so that was the show, and that was on for several years. We had a great following, and then rewind now to 2017 when the Me Too movement hit the mainstream. The Harvey Weinstein scandal, of course, was the catalyst for a lot of that. But the ripple effect started to be felt quite quickly in many other areas of our lives, right? And I started receiving a lot of messages from men who watched my show saying, are you going to do a season on this? Because I have a lot to say about what's happening right now, but I'm afraid to say anything because I don't want to get in trouble. And it's all so confusing. And this is unique to be a woman receiving those messages. That's a unique position to be in. And I realized that because at the same time that I was getting all of these messages from guys who watched my show, I was also, as a woman and a journalist, attending a lot of events and panels about Me Too that was primarily attended by survivors or other women. And I knew that this was a unique position to be in because, on the other hand, I was attending a lot of events about Me Too, that panels and conferences that were primarily attended by other survivors and women. And we would have these really important conversations about how Me Too had impacted our lives in very obvious ways, sometimes in ways people had not even realized until there was this collective sharing of stories. And then there were a lot of really important thoughts being shared about where can we go from here? Where do we want to take this change? And inevitably, in these conversations, someone would look around the room and say, where are all the men? Where are our allies? They don't care. Mm-hmm. And then there would be this nodding. And I knew men do care because I was getting all of these messages. And, you know, as a reporter, of course, you see that opportunity. I have this information that is not being well distributed, but as a human, that kind of made my head explode because I knew that we're having at least these two parallel conversations. And
so before we get further, like, why? Of course, I have my own theories on all this, but why do you think that was the belief?
Okay, well, and I can tell you why. Because men were not showing up to these events. Men were not posting on Facebook about what they thought. The most vocal voices were women sharing their stories, and the few men who sometimes would post, right, would often be detracting voices.
Mm-hmm. Like voices that would be either belittling the Me Too movement and things.
Exactly. And I now know from having spoken to so many men that they were like, I wasn't wanted at those events. I wouldn't go to an event like that. First of all, I wasn't invited. I didn't even know it would happen. You know, no one in my circle is doing that. And if I had gotten an invite, I don't know would people want me there? Mm-hmm. Seem like, you know, is it a safe space? Am I supposed to, you know? And then, no, I'm not going to post about it on Facebook and have my neighbor just like trash me to hell. So I learned an important lesson. I'm wondering what you think of this, that a lot of men had a lot of things to say and wanted to say it, but didn't know how or where or to who.
Yeah, and also a lot of fear which quite honestly is fairly well-founded fear.
Yeah.
Of if expressing something and then getting attacked or ripped apart for it is one major fear, and feeling that there is evidence to reinforce that fear, where they may have seen a man trying to speak up in some way and then just getting piled on. This isn't your time. This is, just shut up and listen. And so just drawing back. I will say that as a man who has actually been in this conversation in one form or another for 20 years, I am extremely practiced with the nuance of communicating around this. Far more than most. And I had a greater hesitancy in my communications during that time.
Yes.
And again, I am far more resourced and practiced than most.
Yes.
And still knowing that if I say one word wrong, this is going to be a shit show. So,
yes.
So I really feel for men in that regards. And the other fear that men have held through this, and quite honestly can still hold, is if I say something, is something from my past, maybe even something I'm completely unaware of, suddenly going to come back at me and my whole life is going to get turned upside down. You know what? It's just easier and safer for me to just sit down and stay quiet.
People are listening to this, they're not seeing this, but I'm just nodding and nodding and nodding. I heard that over and over again, and you're right, it is very well-founded. And I heard this from men all the time. They were like, of course I want to support this, but I don't want to stand up and stick my neck up above the crowd and then have someone be like, oh, remember this from 10 years ago? So 100%. That is the collective feeling, I think. And another reason, and there's anger, there's frustration, there's pain on all sides of this, and I warrant it, I think. But another reason why this book I thought was so important, because I see we have people, men in particular, who really, they came to me to talk. Like they were like, I thought I was being a good guy. So all of this is catching me unaware, and I don't get it because I feel like I was raised to be a chivalrous, noble man, and now you're telling me that's creepy, that's, not, that a good guy doesn't do that. That's, and wanting, just basically feeling confused and blindsided by this, right? And so I know that if you had rewound 5 years ago, say, these men were not at this table. And if we really have an opportunity right now for men and women and non-binary folks of all identities to kind of come together collectively and air a lot of our grievances and experiences and decide, okay, what from our past are we going to leave behind? Some of this behavior we don't have to carry with us, right? Yeah. But we can't do that if we never talk to each other and we're so afraid to step on a landmine, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
So that was the genesis of Modern Manhood.
Well, thank you for answering the call. Another thing that I was finding while I was doing my research on you is that, as a self-identified feminist in this modern world who's deeply embedded in, communities where feminism is often an aspect of identity, did you have any fears or concerns around tackling the subject matter from the angle that you're tackling it from, aka trying to understand and empathize with men during this particular hot button time period?
Yeah, so I, not to be crass or crude about it, but like I really felt like, I'm on a good podcast for this. I felt like I was putting myself over a barrel with this one. And I told my team that I was like, I'm going to get it both ways. I'm going to get it from men who are like, why is a woman writing a book called Modern Manhood? Get out of here. And I'm going to get it from women who are like, you're an apologizer, you're siding with the other side. So I was really ready for that. And the way I protected around that emotionally is that this book is not me. It's not one woman's perspective on how men should be. It is truly a temperature taker. I spoke to nearly 100 men from all over the country, ranging in ages of 18 to 62, all different ethnicities, class backgrounds, regional, right? Because it's so interesting. Like, you talk to a factory worker in rural North Carolina versus like a Latinx teenager in South LA, their perspectives on what a good man is doing today is actually really different, because of the way that they grew up was just so different. So I knew I would get it both ways, and I frankly didn't care, because I just knew that the way I was approaching this is I'm just sharing stories, right? I'm sharing perspectives. And here is the big surprise, Destin. I haven't really gotten it both ways. People who read the book are like, I have to tell you, I was totally put off by a woman writing this. I was going to hate read it. But then I read it and I saw like my own story was reflected in it. I laughed a little. I got the point, you know? So
that's great. And yeah, that's a little refreshing for me to hear as well, because in writing my own book, I hold the same fear or concern, like I'm going to get it from both directions. I'm going to get it from like leftist women and right men who are both going to find every problem through their lens that's of what I expressed. And I had that in my mind quite a bit while writing as well. What I was really aiming for was to not let those fears, so to speak, inhibit my writing, but rather to hone my writing, to be more impeccable and precise with what I communicate, so that whatever attack comes, at least I can stand 100% behind what I write.
Yeah. Do you want to say a little bit more about what your book is about?
Wait, who's doing this interview?
I can do that. Watch out.
It's fine. I love being interviewed.
Yeah. Well, tell us just so we have some context.
Yeah, sure. Of course. Hopefully my audience knows.
Knows.
Hold on.
There you go.
There it is.
Ooh,
for those who are seeing a video version of this, right behind me, I have my first 100 books in boxes. The Evolved Masculine, Be the Man the World Needs and the One She Craves. It's a little, but quite unlike you, this book is extremely personal.
Yeah.
It is so much more so than I anticipated when I started writing it. I originally thought I was writing a more typical self-help book. And I was just like, I don't want to be the guru on the mountaintop who's got it all figured out, telling you if you just, as I write somewhere, if you just do what I say, then you'll have the perfect Instagrammable life like me.
Yeah.
First of all, I do my best to not portray that, because I find that I find that thing that has become such a thing in our time kind of repulsive. And I'm a big believer in the embracing of the full spectrum of our humanity.
Yeah.
The very best of us, the very worst of us, our hopes, our dreams, our yay, but also our pain, our fears, our traumas, our wounds, the fact that we have really difficult days, and we don't need to project that everything is wonderful 100% of the time, because it's not.
Right.
And so I just, you know what? Fuck it. I took myself down I did my best to take myself down off of any pedestal. I integrated my own very unusual life, which I was concerned my life has been too out there, so to speak, for people to relate to. And then I'm like, you know what? It's also extremely interesting. And all I need to do is draw out the universality of the experiences from the weirdness of the experience.
Yes, yes,
um,
yes,
and
yes.
if I can do that right, then it will be both like titillating and drawing and like entertaining enough to keep you engaged while also having you feel like, okay, I get that, I see myself in that. I mean, we do that all the time when we go to Hollywood films, you know.
Yes.
So that was really my intent here. Every like the people who have done advanced reads on it, consistently what comes back to me is how raw the book is, and how much that's appreciated, because it that level of openness, vulnerability, sharing, rawness is not that common, especially in this type of a book. And so I've really appreciated that, and hope that that comes through to those who read it, because I believe that we learn best as men, particularly through modeling, and that we can have the biggest impediment to change is ego. And so I think that where we can have our ego come up again, like this is where I meant particularly men, is like where somebody else is telling us what we're supposed to be doing. Fuck that. I don't work that way. I resist that. I'm not doing that here. Let me lay out to you, like, most of what I write about, I learned the hard way. I got it horribly wrong. And I felt the pain of getting it horribly wrong, to the point where I had to find something better. And I poured an insane amount of time, energy, and resources into finding another way. And this is what I learned. May your path be easier from reading it. All right, there's my answer.
Well done. Well done.
Back to you, Cleo.
Well, so this is, your story. Like that's kind of my feeling with what's happening right now, is that people are having strong reactions to this. And so the book is broken up into chapters, as a book is, but each chapter is dedicated to a different area of your personal life. So we start with dating, we move to sex, then we go to work, then money, parenting, friendship. And the reason that is because this movement, so here's the other thing that was happening. Without Simon and Schuster coming to me to write a book for them, this book was already just sitting in my inbox, because when men were writing to me, like, are you going to do a season on this? I have a lot to say. What would also happen is, like, inevitably their message would conclude with a question, like something that was going on in their lives. And these questions all started falling into the same exact camps. And what was interesting is, like, they were kind of really basic stuff. Like, if you had asked them 5 years earlier, it would just be like, oh, dude, I don't know, like, pick up a manual, how to be a boss, pick up how to go on a date, right? But the way that Me Too had started as a conversation, in the workplace, about power dynamics in the workplace, and also power dynamics between men and women in the bedroom. It did not, first of all, it could have stayed there and we could be talking about, that's enough, right? That's certainly enough. But it was infiltrating people's parenting. Like, during the Kavanaugh hearings, I had a lot of men write into me that were like, I'm watching this hearing and my head is like exploding, because I don't like this man. I don't like what I'm hearing. But I'm trying to, like, reconcile with my own behavior. To be quite frank, I also was blackout drunk in my underage college years, in my 20s. I'm not so sure how I treated the women in my past. So there's that personal level of, what does this all mean? Stuff that previous generations were like, that was, just kids.
But honestly, that's fantastic. I mean, on one hand, it's like, it's painful to hear, and just the breadth and how widespread these issues have been. But I mean, what we've for change like this to occur, especially on scale, it requires that reconciliation. I'm sorry, first it requires a confrontation and then a reconciliation. Like a confrontation with like, what have I done? Who have I been? What ways have I behaved that are not actually who I want to be?
Right. Yeah.
And so even if my generation and certainly older fuck things up royally and maybe even cause tremendous harm that cannot be condoned, if we're willing to confront it, own it, make amends however we can, to whatever degree we can, and honestly, most importantly, stop it here so the next generation coming in shows up differently.
Yes.
And what more can we ask for?
So let me tell you two stories that are coming to mind as you're saying that. And interestingly, they were both stemming from the Kavanaugh hearing. This book is generally fairly apolitical because always from my reporting, I had a lot of conservatives and liberals and moderates who work. So in general, but Kavanaugh did come up in the book because men kept bringing up Kavanaugh, which I saw as like
can you just do just for the reader who doesn't actually know?
Oh, sure.
What this is?
Yes, sorry, my apologies. So about a year and a half ago,
Sorry, I mean listener, not reader.
Yeah.
Go on.
I know the mediums get confusing. Brett Kavanaugh was being considered as a justice to our Supreme Court, and in the hearings, which happened for everyone who is considered as a potential justice to the Supreme Court, it became revealed that he had incidents with women in his past. Dr. Christine Blasey Ford will sound familiar, and there were two other women as well. The Dr. Christine Blasey Ford testified about what happened to her at the hands of Brett Kavanaugh and was cross-examined. And then Brett Kavanaugh spoke about his opinion of what she had said. And it was decades after what had happened with the Judge Clarence Brown and Anita Hill. So for a lot of women, this was very triggering because it felt like here we are decades later, and we will confirm a man to the Supreme Court despite a fact that a woman is coming forward to say he treated her very badly. And many people did not believe Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, and I'm not here to debate that, but that was the national conversation. We did, of course, end up confirming Judge Brett Kavanaugh. He currently sits on our highest court right now, and you can take from that what you will. But the message that it sent to many women in the country was that this country does not believe you, does not support you, and the male experience is privileged. The white male Ivy League experience is privileged above all else. So that was what happened about a year and a half ago when the hearings were happening. Now, this was interesting because men's were writing into me. I spoke to, in two stories in particular, I'll say. One man I talked to for this book, and I talked to him, he had written in around the time of the hearing, but I did a full interview with him maybe 6 months ago in preparation for this book. And he had said, I'm watching this Kavanaugh hearing, and I'm hating this guy, and I'm raising a son who's 4, and I'm just thinking, like, I don't even know what it means to raise a good man anymore. But if my son turned out to be like Brett Kavanaugh, that would just be the ultimate nightmare. And that's profound, right?
Sure.
So
If my son
here,
turned out to be like a a court
justice.
that
That would be a nightmare. Who went to Yale, who went through the highest circuits of our nation, who is, so this is that watching that while you are on, that hearing that kind of behavior, right? And obviously this is coming, we've heard headlines about Brock Turner, who was a boy that was caught in the act of sexually assaulting an unconscious woman and got a very, very small prison sentence for that. There's a lot of conversation without Me Too about sexual assault that comes up, right? And I will just say that Modern Manhood does not deal with any violent acts. And I was very intentional about that. There are many other colleagues of mine who do. Those areas, in my opinion, are not gray. Those are anything that would get you potentially thrown in jail or are illegal, I'm not dealing with in these books. This book is specifically about gray issues, right? So if you're watching something like a Kavanaugh hearing and you're thinking about how you raise your son, shit, that is nuanced. That is gray. So that's where I am. So one story about Kavanaugh that I do find really interesting, I'll just set the scene, was from a man who's in his 30s. He lives in LA now, but he's from Texas, a Mexican-American family. And he says he is so Mexican that the border crossed him. He didn't cross the border. That's how deep in the portion of Texas in his Mexican identity he is. He was the first of his family to go to college, and he got into a really good one. The same one that Brett Kavanaugh went to, Yale. You may have heard of it. So when he went, and the other thing, not only was he the first of his family to go as first-generation Mexican-American, but he also went when he was really young. He was very smart and lucky to have tested in, and for his family, this was so big. So he's at Yale as a very young man, doesn't feel like he fits in, and he said he drank to ease his feelings of isolation and like he did not belong. And that...
Not uncommon.
Not uncommon. He said, listen, if you told me when I was in college I had a problem with alcohol, I could not deny that there. And that when he was watching, right, so he thinks of college as a really dark time, even though outwardly, the mobile success of getting into an Ivy League school from someone of his background was so wonderful. Personally, the experience is very hard for him, right? Now, fast forward 15 years, he's 30, he works in LA, he's very successful in media, and he's watching these Kavanaugh hearings. And it hits home for him on a deeper level, I think probably because they both went to the same undergrad. But he's thinking about it, and he was telling me that he's like driving home one day, kind of listening to the news coverage, and it kind of hits him that he is judging Brett Kavanaugh so much for the incidents that have been reported about him and thinking, what does it say about us that we're promoting this man to our highest court? And then it hits him. I'm judging this man for this behavior, but hell, I may have this in my past. Because he recalls Yale, and he's like, I'm 99% sure I never did anything like that, but I couldn't say 100% because the truth is 1% of that time I was blackout drunk. And there's one woman in particular from his past that comes to mind because he would only engage in sexual activity with her when he was completely blackout. And he really is thinking, like, he hasn't thought of this woman in 15 years. They haven't spoken, but it hits him, and he is called, like, what do I do with this? And he does something that I think is, like, quite unusual for people who are having these kind of realizations, like, ugh, I might be implicated in this. He actually reached out to her. I will have to say, I didn't speak to her, so this is just coming from his side. But he said, he was like, I hadn't talked to her in 15 years, but I just I could not hear everything that was happening in our nation and feel good about myself without owning maybe what I have done in the past. It just does not square with the man I want to be today. Mm-hmm. They're actually Facebook friends. And so he reached out to her on Facebook and said something to the line of like, listen, this may be totally off base and you may not even know what I'm talking about, but I'm watching what's happening with Kavanaugh and I am feeling like I did not treat you as I should. And I want to apologize if I made you feel less than. I'm not expecting you to accept my apology, and I'm not even expecting a response. But I want you to know that I don't feel good about what happened between us. And I just want to hold a second of space for that, right?
Yeah, wow.
And he told me that she wrote back and she was completely not expecting it. But she said that it really meant a lot for him to have said that. He had caused her pain. And he came to me when he heard that I was writing this book because he wanted to share that experience. And I just, this is the sort of, I just, share this with you and your listeners because this is the kind of realness that's rippling across our country right now. I mean, behind the angry Facebook threads and the divisive conversations, people really are thinking carefully about their own accountability and what they want to show up as and how they want to behave differently going forward. And it's stories like that I like super shit,
I think it's incredible, and I'm really grateful to hear you put words to this, and especially as somebody who has done the research and all the interviews, and especially with such a broad like cross-section of men.
Yeah.
Something I'm very curious about, and I don't know how we would quantify or really know, like, as long as I've been an adult, and I mean legal 18-year-old adult, I've been aware of the fact that we have an epidemic of sexual assault and trauma in this country. And yeah, something that most men were in denial of, if not most women as well, to be honest. Yeah. And I'm curious what is actually happening as far as like tangible impact. Like, has there been a steep like drop off in actual assaults, violations, etc.? And how would we know?
I do not know the answer to that. And I don't know how we would know, because this was one of the other things, in reporting this book. The first defense barrier that gets put up by a lot of people, many men and many women as well, when it comes to this Me Too conversation, is that there's this like, okay, when it first happened, the Harvey Weinsteins, the Bill Cosbys, I was all in favor. Of course, those are terrible men. They should not be in power. But then it just went too far. Because
it actually touched my life.
Yeah. And then because now I feel like anyone can just, I can say, hey, nice dress, Sally. And the next thing I know, I'm losing the stock options in the company that I've been, worked so hard in for 20 years. And from the woman's side, it'll be like, my husband's a college professor and I'm just terrified that one of these like thoughtless co-eds is just going to lodge a complaint with him so she can get straight A's. This is the kind of immediate defense that comes up about this, right? Mm-hmm. And so to work through that kind of conversation as a reporter, your first order of business is to be like, okay, well, let's look at the stats, right? What do we know about sexual assault? What do we know about false reports? And it's very hard to gather information on these statistics because we know in general sexual violence is way underreported to begin with.
Absolutely. I mean, almost none of the women I know who have, or men for that matter, or myself for that matter, who have been sexually violated, reported to the police.
Right.
Almost none.
Yeah. Understandably. Why would
they deal with it horribly?
Yeah.
It's like, let me go through a second violation.
Yes, exactly. So it's really, so I again, in the book, I didn't deal with the black and white, what I consider to be violent, black and white, illegal issues of sexual violence. The sex chapter is actually dedicated to this like fire squad issue I found of Aziz Ansari, which that story was almost like a war shock test for people. Like if you know, the way that you reacted to the Aziz Ansari story was very indicative of how you felt about the Me Too movement's more insidious implications in general. And so I seriously did not intend to spend the entire chapter on sex talking about that microcosm, but we had to, because it came up over and over and over again, and it was so consent, the nuances of consent. Oh man, there's so much to be said about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can get far more nuanced even than the Aziz Ansari
certainly
situation, but I felt a lot of mixed feelings when that story was really primarily anything that's causing us to go deeper into the conversation I view as a good thing.
Yes, agreed.
I expected this whole thing to be messy. And it is. It's horribly messy. And there are certainly times where I wish that certainly the media were handling things differently than they did. The prominent female voices, there are often times where I wish that the response was different in the moment, but I've had a lot of trust in the journey where we are going. So as far as the Aziz Ansari situation, again, I'll do my unpacking. And honestly, no, you just do it. You'll do it better than me. Can you synopsize that?
Oh, sure. So Aziz Ansari's situation will sound very, very, very familiar to anyone listening, because this is a very familiar experience.
Except he's a famous actor.
Except he's a famous actor. But we will depair that after we talk about what actually happened. So Aziz Ansari went on a date with a woman, first date, and they had a good time. He said, "You want to come back to my place?" She said, "Sure." They went back to his place. He made a move. She said, "No, thank you." He waited a couple minutes. He made another move. She said, "Listen, I really don't want to have sex." Like, they were on the couch. He was, trying to make out, get in there. She said, no. He's like, "No, no problem. We'll just watch TV." She's like, "Okay." He makes another move. She relents. She gives him oral sex. She leaves. She gets in a cab. He texts her, "Hey, I had a great time. Thank you so much." And she writes him back, "Listen, you really upset me. And I want you to know that, because I don't want this to happen to another person." And she left in the Uber crying. Subsequent to that, she told her story to a digital media company, and it kind of took on a life of its own. But I think that that's unfortunate, or that's a distraction, because what ended up happening is that like along no gendered lines whatsoever. This was really like, it ran the gamut. You had women that were, I talked to women who were like, that is every single date I had in college. You don't see me crying about it, right? I had men who were like, that was wrong. And I feel that that was wrong because my wife told me a story where she was in a situation where someone pressured her into sex and she eventually relented and had sex with that person because she just got worn down. And when my wife told me that, I don't like that. That's wrong, right? So not along gendered lines, but everyone agreed that's very common. Like, this is a very common situation. And some people said, that's just a bad date. It's a bad date. That's not a Me Too thing. And what I say is, we can do better.
Totally.
We can and should do better. We do not need ourselves leaving a sexual experience crying in an Uber. And you telling me how common it is does not make me feel better about it.
I mean, I honestly think that my book touches this quite a bit.
Yeah.
You know, I lay it out through different personal experiences that had me understand this.
Yeah. Tell me some. Come on, lay it on me.
I'm going to send you a copy of my book, by the way.
Okay.
I was going to tell you after, but
okay.
Again, I was introduced to all of this quite young by my high school sweetheart's rape on her 15th birthday just before we met. My book opens with this story. And so at 16 years old, rape became a real thing.
Yeah.
Versus, you know, something in movies or what have you.
Yes.
And it provoked not just outrage, it provoked rage. I experienced a lot of rage. And it also was a catalyst that caused me to distrust my own sexuality and my own masculinity. Something that's happening now quite a bit. I feel like I was on the leading edge of that.
Yeah.
and led me to kind of like pull back away from these parts of myself quite a bit over the next decade. Retreat into my feminine quite a bit because it felt safer. And but it also opened up for me something where I entered into college, and suddenly I became the space where women told their stories to. Often, if not the first person that she ever told, certainly the first man she ever told.
Yeah.
And so by the time I graduated college, I had dozens, if not more, of women's various stories under my belt, and they were really changing me. And I increasingly pulled away from other men and started connecting more and more with women and shutting men out of my life, and started to relate myself as like, I am different. You know, I'm not like that. I'm not.
Yeah.
If this is what men are like, then I don't want to have anything to do with it. I'm out.
Yeah.
But it caused a lot of problems in my life, disconnecting in this way, and being so disconnected from my own masculinity. And I mean, some of this gets very complex and things I'd love to unpack with different prominent feminist and queer theorists personally, because I started getting the message all around me, especially living in New York City, that like, you know, that I'm just a feminine man, just I have to embrace that that's who I am, etc. And it took a decade for me to realize that's actually not the full truth here. It's not this is who I am. I'm actually carrying a lot of fucking wound and trauma and secondary trauma through this. And so my expression and how I'm relating to the world is rooted in that trauma, not in like my authentic being. And so I had to go on a very intense confrontation into my own wounds around my masculinity and my distrust of other men, and heal them. And only through there did I start to discover like who I am. What is and I went on a very intentional exploration of my masculinity. I went on a very intentional exploration of my sexuality. And radical exploration. I took on I created the persona of the erotic rock star that I dove into for 7 years, because I wanted to know like what would an aligned, integrous, like caring, sexually empowered man who actually loved women be like, because where the fuck are our examples?
Right. Yes.
And it was very full of adventure, we'll say. And imperfect, but along within that, I share a couple of stories of being like in 2005, Neil Strauss's The Game came out, right? And that massively, it took this pickup culture that was existing underground and it basically took it out from the underground. And it injected itself into our culture fast, and especially in urban environments. And by 2007, which was when I started really like diving into this erotic rockstar persona, that was friggin' everywhere. And I'm like, this does not feel good to me, but it is being embraced by men so much. Why and what's going on here? And in many ways, my erotic rockstar was my artistic and spiritual response to that, as I spoke of it. And I just felt that there's, I have to show that there's a better way. I have to prove it, if not to other people, certainly to myself.
Yes. Yeah.
But so I'm getting a little off track here, I tried to study what was going on here to understand it and see like how do we do things better. And some of the messaging was very much rooted in why that's so common. The messaging is, as a man, like, you just have to fucking go for it.
Yes.
Your job is to notch that belt.
Yeah.
If you get her alone with you, which is priority number one, then just keep trying. If she's a no here, try this other angle. If she's a no there, we'll just draw back for a minute and try again. If I would literally read messages along the lines of unless she gets up and leaves, she's not a real no.
Exactly.
Anything else is just token resistance.
Exactly.
This is the reason why we have that issue. And quite personally, and this is something that I wrote in the book that, might be one of the controversial statements, I don't know. I don't think it's a coincidence that the pickup move era directly preceded the Me Too era.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I don't think that it's the sole thing, of course, because we had a problem long before that, but it was like, it helped tip us over into enough.
Well, so here's what we unpack in the book, and I'll say, like, we open up that chapter with a guy who came to me. So every chapter is opened up with a personal story that completely encapsulates what we're going to unpack in the chapter. Mm-hmm. And every single personal story, that person came to me when they heard I was writing this book. They were like, oh, do I have a story for you? Or like, thank you, because I need to get this off my chest. Mm. And this guy came to me and was like, I heard you're writing a story about what it means to be a good guy. As soon as the Aziz Ansari thing happened, this story from my past has just been on my mind, like, for the past year and a half, and I need to get it off. And this guy proceeds to tell me a story from 2011. This is how long it's been sitting with him. And he described himself as a late bloomer, a programming guy living down in DC, He had a crush on a woman in his clique, but they were just friends. New Year's Eve happens. They're all out partying. He invites her and a couple of the other friends back to his apartment. Only one other guy friend comes, so it's like the three of them. They keep drinking. The ball drops. It's around 3 or 4 in the morning. The third guy is like, all right, I'm going to get out of here. This is 2011, so it's like pre-Uber days. So the woman, it kind of like does that mental calculation. She lives across town. The subways are down. It's not really feasible for her to get home. And this guy who's telling me the story is like, so I said, you can spend the night here. And she's like, you don't mind? He's like, no, absolutely. So she says she'll spend the night at his place. He thinks, ding, 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 I'm in. So she goes, I'm just going to change into pajamas. And she puts on like a t-shirt of his and some boxers. He gets into bed. She comes out. She gets into bed with him. He makes a move. She's like, whoa, what are you doing? We're friends. And I thought no, right? No, I thought you were offering this to me as a friend. So as he's telling me this, he admits that his memory is a little foggy because he was inebriated, as many of these stories are, right? But he knows that the main thing that went through his mind was all women say no at first. That's what they do. So he waits a beat and then really goes back in. And this is the way he describes it to me, that he almost violently, right, aggressively tries to yank down her underwear. And she's shocked and just screams and jumps out of bed and is like, what are you doing? And slams the door to the bedroom and goes and sleeps on the couch. And he lies there for the rest of the night, like shocked at his own behavior and terrified for what that he did to her. And he's like, how did I get that so wrong? And now
cultural conditioning.
Oh my God. And he's telling me this story and I can hear the pain, the shallow breathing, the fear in that this still conjures up for him so many feelings of terrified at what he almost did to her and how that made him feel and what the fuck happened. And now I didn't talk to her, so this is from his perspective, but he told me that the next morning, as soon as it became light, he went out there and he apologized and was like, I am so sorry. I was absolutely wrong. I like don't trust myself right now. And I'm so sorry for hurting you. And that he's very grateful to her because she received his apology and they talked about it. And according to him, they're actually good friends now. They're, and he said that she would not have been wrong to have, that it scared him how aggressive he was. So I heard this and I also empathetically had shallow breathing and was very uncomfortable and the hair on my arms were standing up for this woman and for him. And hell, if that story is not common to all of us, right? Even if you haven't gone that far, you actually may have without realizing it. Or it's just that this disconnect we have in intimate situations is so strong, right? So that's the story that sets up that chapter.
What's the chapter called?
Sex.
Okay. It's a great story. I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only one listening to you who like feels it in the body. It's like
you feel it. And he was, and there's so many, it's nuanced. You're like, but she got into bed with him. What was he supposed to think? Why did she, right? So we unpack all of that. But
I'm really looking forward to diving more deeply into the book. Here are my, I have a lot of thoughts already on the parts that you've shared. I mean, eh, and I hope you choose to read the book that I sent you, because I really love to hear your thoughts and feedback on it, because I really try to lay out a paradigm for men to take on that I think is why I was quote unquote so successful during my erotic rock star years, because with the history that I had with my high school girlfriend's rape, and those messages I got early on, and having that as my foundation, and then diving into how do I be not only like, how do I be adequate, like how do I become sexually fucking powerful while holding this place of like such deep empathy and knowing of women's experiences of violation, need for safety. I don't even like using the terms like need for consent, because it's so much more than that.
No, it's so yes.
It's so much more than that, because there's a term now of enthusiastic consent, but even that feels like it starts from, is rooted in the paradigm of the man wants it.
Yes.
He's going for it.
Yes.
And she's deciding whether she's gonna keep it out, be a yes, or even like, yes, I want this.
Yes.
So what about the like? What about like her authentic sexual desire that's rooted within her, that's irrespective of him, and that can even be larger than him?
Totally. Yes. Amen. We talk about all of that in the chapter. And it's set up that women are the we've socialized that women are the gatekeepers of sex, that men always have to want it, that men are supposed to take it from women. Mm-hmm. And women get put in this terrible, you can't win, where it's like, if you do want it, then you're a slut. But if you don't want it, well, you're never supposed to want it anyway. So like so often women don't even know, do I want it or not? Right. So, and then men are not thinking, they're not seeing women as humans. They're seeing them as things to take from. And that sets up this, before we even get to the bedroom, we're in an adversarial dynamic. Sure. And like, shit, that's a terrible way. Like, oh my God, right? Like, what kind of that is why people leave crying in Ubers. Yeah. So, we could, we could talk for days about it, but there's so much work to be done. And I'm heartened that I, as someone who's been reporting on stories in this for the past 10 years, like I really can say with great earnest that people who were previously not interested in examining their own behavior are.
That's awesome.
Now.
That's awesome. Again, I want to really thank you for dedicating so much of yourself into putting this together, writing this book, putting yourself out there, opening yourself up to potential criticism, that and just doing the work. And it is such a service, not only to men, but to women, of course, as well, to the world, to all peoples. Is there any parting message or that you'd like to share with men? And then, of course, how can we find you?
Oh, yes. Well, you can find me at cleostiller.net. Stiller like Ben Stiller. So CleoStiller.net. And I'm on all the social channels at Cleo Stiller. If you do read the book or you have a reaction to this conversation, definitely get in touch with me. I've heard from so many people. It's so interesting what people are really responding to. There's this concept we talk about in the book called the man box, that people are just like, oh my God, my mind is blown. It's wild. So I wanted to call this book, But I'm One of the Good Guys. Because I heard that over and over again. It just came up so like, I'm a good guy. What the hell is happening? I'm a good guy. How did this happen? And the question of what does a good man do today And the question on the other side of what does a good woman do today? I offer that we can get lost there, and that women and men do not do a lot of self-inquiry about what motivates our everyday behaviors, right? We're sort of on autopilot. We do what our parents do, or we do the opposite of what our parents do if we didn't like them. But we don't think about it a lot, right? And we don't think about how our every single sentence or action impacts others. Some people are like, oh, that's exhausting. I don't want it. But here's what I offer. If you get really clear on what a good person does, what kind of person do you want to be? How do you want to show up in this world? So for example, one thing that came up a lot was like, I don't even know if I'm supposed to hold the door for someone behind me now. It's like, is that am I going to get yelled at? Am I not? Blah, blah, blah. Right. Blah. Don't hold the door because like that's what you were taught men do for women. Hold the door for the person coming behind you because that's what a good person does. And if you don't want to hold the door for the person coming behind you, then don't do it. But also, that's really good information to have about yourself. Why don't you want to hold the door for the person coming up? And think about what is motivating that behavior. And I offer that to people because I think that kind of self-inquiry and getting really clear on your own motivations is actually very empowering. And we need people to feel more clear on why they're doing what they're doing. And that will make them feel more empowered because the fear and the stress and the anxiety around, I feel like I'm walking on a tightrope right now. That's because you are not clear on your motivations and you are worried that your behavior is going to get you in trouble instead of getting really clear on, is your behavior potentially hurting someone? And can you do something to change that, right? So that's what I offer. That's
beautifully said. Beautifully said.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. You've really been a wonderful guest. Again, everyone, cleostiller.net. Check her out. And the book is Modern Manhood. You can head over right now to buy it on Amazon or wherever books are sold. And if you're seeing some video, she's holding it up right now. Wonderful cover as well. Thank you again. I've really enjoyed this conversation. In all honesty, I could easily just do this with you for another couple hours.
Yeah, it's okay.
And I look forward to continuing to connect.
Wonderful. Me too.
Thank you for listening to the Evolved Masculine podcast. If you liked what you heard, please be sure to subscribe, give us a 5-star rating, and leave a comment to help other men discover this show and help the Evolved Masculine movement spread. It really does help. I want you to do more than simply consume content, but rather to embody a new way of being and radically transform your life for the better. Join us in the Evolved Masculine membership community, a brotherhood of men who are committed to being the best men that we can be. Crystallize a vision of your most evolved masculine self and implement the tools to take him out of the idea realm and begin embodying him now. Reprogram your sexuality and deepen your understanding of women and the feminine. Learn more and join us at evolvedmasculine.com/membership. I believe in you.